When you think of billionaires in prison, you might picture luxury, but the reality is far more shocking. Here's how the richest people truly live behind bars. Alan Stanford once lived a life of private jets, sprawling mansions, and elite social circles. But today, he wakes up every morning in a cramped prison cell at USP Coleman II, a high-security federal penitentiary in Florida. His days are no longer filled with luxury but with the harsh reality of a life behind bars. Stanford, once the flashy billionaire behind the Stanford Financial Group, was sentenced to 110 years in prison for running a massive Ponzi scheme. He defrauded investors out of $7 billion, a number so large that it shook the financial world. Unlike some white-collar criminals who end up in lower security facilities, Stanford was sent to one of the toughest federal prisons in the country. Coleman II is known for housing violent offenders, gang members, and some of the most notorious criminals in the United States. Life here is nothing like the five-star hotels Stanford was used to. His cell is small, furnished with a metal bed, a thin mattress, a toilet, and a small metal sink. There's no privacy, no luxury, and certainly no special treatment. The food is bland, served on metal trays in a noisy dining hall. Inmates are woken up before dawn and follow a strict schedule of roll calls, work assignments, and inspections. Gone are the days of fine dining. Now, his meals consist of mass-produced prison food, with the occasional vending machine snack if he can afford it from the commissary. But perhaps the hardest part of Stanford's imprisonment is the company he keeps. Coleman II is home to dangerous criminals, and survival here means keeping a low profile. He has no access to the lavish life he once flaunted, no yachts, no exclusive parties, no designer suits. Instead, he wears a standard-issue khaki uniform, blending in with thousands of other inmates. One of the few escapes from the monotony is the prison yard where he can exercise. But even there, tensions run high. Fights break out regularly, and violence is a constant threat. With limited access to medical care and little protection, even a minor altercation can turn deadly. Though he once had a net worth in the billions, money means very little in prison. Commissary funds are tightly controlled, and privileges are limited. Letters from the outside world are rare, and visits are infrequent. Many of his former associates and high society friends have long since abandoned him. Stanford still maintains his innocence, claiming that he was unfairly targeted. But in the concrete walls of USP Coleman II, his protests mean nothing. There are no boardrooms to impress, no investors to persuade, only locked doors, razor wire, and guards who see him as just another inmate. Not long ago, Sam Bankman-Fried was a billionaire, a genius in the crypto world, and a man who seemed untouchable. Now he wakes up every day in a tiny prison cell at Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, one of the most notorious federal jails in the United States. The man who once managed billions in digital assets now has no access to the internet, no luxury, and no control over anything, not even his daily meals. MDC Brooklyn isn't just a prison, it's a harsh, overcrowded facility known for its grim conditions. There is no air conditioning in the summer and the heating barely works in the winter. Inmates describe it as filthy, freezing, and violent. Bankman-Fried, who once had a penthouse in the Bahamas, now sleeps on a metal bunk in a shared cell, surrounded by thick gray walls and the constant hum of flickering fluorescent lights. The food is barely edible. MDC Brooklyn has been criticized for serving meals that are often spoiled or infested with roaches. For a man who once had access to private chefs and the finest restaurants, eating cold, mass-produced meals from a tray must feel like a nightmare. But food is the least of his problems. The real danger here isn't the poor conditions, it's the inmates. MDC Brooklyn holds some of the most dangerous criminals in the country. Gang members, drug traffickers, and violent offenders fill the prison blocks. There are no special privileges for Bankman-Fried. He isn't surrounded by Wall Street elites or tech entrepreneurs. Instead, he's just another inmate trying to keep his head down and survive. His time behind bars has already been rough. Reports suggest that he struggles with hygiene and has had difficulty adjusting to prison life. At MDC, there's no room for comfort. Inmates are subjected to frequent lockdowns, strip searches, and extreme isolation. There's little access to reading material, and his once voracious appetite for learning has been reduced to staring at gray walls for hours. There are no high-stakes investments to make, no Twitter debates, no lavish parties, just time, endless and unforgiving. For a man who built an empire on speed, where billions could be traded in seconds, prison is the ultimate punishment. His legal team is trying to appeal his 25-year sentence, but even if they succeed, he will spend years locked away in a system that doesn't care about crypto, innovation, or influence. Soon Dawu built a vast agricultural empire in China, employing thousands and earning a fortune through his business ventures. But now, instead of overseeing his farms and factories, he spends his days behind bars in a concrete cell in Baoding prison, a high-security facility known for housing political prisoners and dissidents. Sun was sentenced to 18 years on charges of picking quarrels, provoking trouble, and illegal fundraising, vague accusations often used in China against individuals who challenge the government. His real crime? Speaking too freely about corruption and government mismanagement. He was a billionaire, but in China, even vast wealth offers no protection when the authorities decide you've crossed the line. Life in Baoding prison is a stark contrast to the freedom and influence he once enjoyed. Prison cells here are cold, cramped, and tightly monitored. Inmates wake up early, work long hours in prison factories, and are subjected to strict discipline and political indoctrination sessions. There is no internet access, no outside news, and limited contact with family. Letters are censored, visits are restricted, and every move is watched by guards and surveillance cameras. The prison diet is simple: steamed rice, vegetables, and sometimes a thin broth, with small pieces of meat. The portions are barely enough to sustain inmates who work long, grueling shifts. For a man who once ran a major agricultural business, being forced into prison labor under harsh conditions is a cruel irony. Sun is kept away from the public eye. Unlike some high-profile prisoners who occasionally get media attention, he has been effectively erased from public discussion in China. His company was taken over, his family has been silenced, and his fortune, once a symbol of his success, is now completely out of his control. His future remains uncertain. At 70 years old, an 18-year sentence is essentially a life sentence. He is locked away in a system designed not just to punish but to break those who once had power. The billionaire farmer who once spoke about justice and fairness now lives in the shadows, reduced to a nameless prisoner in one of China's toughest detention centers. Diddy Combs was recently one of the most powerful figures in the music industry. A billionaire mogul, a business empire, and decades of influence in entertainment, none of it matters inside the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, where he now finds himself locked up. Combs is currently facing serious federal charges including sex trafficking and racketeering, accusations that have rocked the industry and sent shockwaves through his once loyal fan base. As he awaits trial, he is held without bail in one of the most infamous detention centers in the United States, a place known for overcrowding, violence, and terrible living conditions. MDC Brooklyn is not a comfortable place for a celebrity. There are no special privileges, no luxury cells, no private accommodations. His world has shrunk to a 6 by 8 foot concrete room with a metal bunk, a thin mattress, and a steel toilet. The lights never truly go out, the noise is constant, and the smell of sweat and mildew lingers in the air. The food is borderline inedible. Bland, cold meals served on plastic trays, sometimes covered in roaches. Water access is limited, and hygiene products are basic at best. For a man accustomed to private jets and designer clothes, prison-issued khakis and cheap bar soap are a harsh reality check. MDC is filled with violent offenders, gang members, and career criminals. The guards don't care if you're famous, and the other inmates definitely don't either. To survive here, you have to adapt fast. Combs has reportedly kept a low profile, avoiding confrontation and staying away from prison politics. With his high-profile case, his legal team is pushing for a quick resolution, but there are no guarantees. If convicted, he could spend decades in federal prison, moving from MDC Brooklyn to a maximum security facility. The glitz, the glamour, the money, none of it matters now. His future is uncertain, and the only thing that's clear is that his time in prison has just begun. Prakash Hinduja, once at the helm of a vast business empire and part of one of the wealthiest families in Britain, now wakes up each morning inside a Swiss prison cell. Gone are the days of luxury mansions and exclusive gala events. His life is now confined to cold, sterile walls and rigid routines. Hinduja was sentenced to over 4 years in prison in 2024, convicted for human trafficking and labor exploitation. The case shook Switzerland, as investigators uncovered that his household staff, brought in from India, were working under inhumane conditions, forced into long hours for barely any pay, while being completely cut off from the outside world. His arrest was a rare moment where extreme wealth did not provide an escape route. The Swiss prison system is known for its strict discipline and order, but it lacks the brutality found in some other countries. that doesn't mean Hinduja's time behind bars is comfortable. Unlike the sprawling mansions he once owned, his prison cell is small and functional. A bed, a basic toilet, a small desk. There is no special treatment, no private chefs, no servants to wait on him. Daily life follows a strict schedule. Early wake-ups, prison work assignments, and a highly structured routine replace the freedom he once enjoyed. The food is simple, stews, bread, and vegetables, far from the gourmet meals he once indulged in. Inmates are allowed a limited amount of personal belongings, and while Switzerland's prisons are known for being clean, they are still places of strict control and isolation. His wealth, once a symbol of power, means little inside these walls. He is surrounded by men from all walks of life, some convicted of violent crimes, others serving sentences for financial fraud. Hinduja, once accustomed to commanding boardrooms, now follows the orders of prison guards. His future is uncertain. After serving his sentence, he faces legal troubles in multiple countries, meaning this may not be his final time behind bars. The billionaire who once shaped industries is now just another inmate, stripped of the status and privileges that once defined him. Xiao Jianhua was once one of the most powerful businessmen in China, a financial mastermind who controlled billions. But in 2017, he vanished from his Hong Kong apartment, reportedly abducted by Chinese security agents. For years, his fate remained a mystery. Then in 2022, he resurfaced in a Chinese courtroom, facing a 13-year prison sentence. Today, he serves his time in Xinjiang Prison, China's most notorious high-security facility. Xinjiang isn't just any prison, it's where the government locks away high-profile political prisoners, fallen billionaires, and former officials who have lost favor. Unlike the overcrowded, chaotic jails in other parts of the world, Xinjiang is designed to break prisoners psychologically rather than physically. Xiao's days are spent in a small, sterile cell, under constant surveillance. There is no contact with the outside world, and even letters from family members are heavily censored or blocked entirely. The prison is designed to isolate inmates, limiting their ability to speak with others. Many prisoners spend hours alone, confined to their rooms with only brief monitored breaks. Food is minimal: boiled rice, vegetables, and occasionally a small portion of meat. Unlike Western prisons where inmates can buy extra food at a commissary, Xinjiang strictly controls access to outside resources. Even the books inmates read are carefully selected by authorities to ensure they do not contain ideas deemed dangerous by the state. Xiao's fortune, once estimated at over $5 billion, is completely out of his control. His company, Tomorrow Group, was dismantled, his assets seized, and his network erased from China's business world. While some powerful figures in China managed to regain influence after serving time, Xiao's case suggests he will never make a comeback. His sentence is more than just a punishment, it's a message. They had billions, power, and influence, but none of it saved them from a life behind bars. And these aren't the only tycoons who fell. Now let's look at the richest criminals in history who ended up in prison. Some built empires, others stole fortunes, but all lost their freedom. Pablo Escobar wasn't just any drug lord, he was so powerful that he negotiated his own imprisonment. In 1991, facing pressure from the Colombian government, Escobar agreed to surrender under one condition: he would build his own prison. The result was La Catedral, a luxury compound disguised as a penitentiary. It had a nightclub, a soccer field, a bar, a gym, and even a waterfall. Escobar's men acted as his personal guards, and Colombian authorities were banned from stepping inside. But calling it a prison was a joke. He continued running the Medellin cartel from inside, organizing drug shipments, ordering assassinations, and making more money than ever. His empire thrived, and his confinement changed nothing. He even hosted lavish parties, bringing in celebrities and girls while the government pretended everything was under control. That illusion ended in 1992. When officials finally decided to move him to a real prison, Escobar escaped into the mountains, setting off the largest manhunt in Colombian history. His reign wouldn't last much longer. Just over a year later, he was tracked down and killed, marking the bloody end of a man who once lived as the king of his own cage. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman spent decades building the Sinaloa cartel into one of the most powerful drug trafficking organizations in history. But after 2 daring prison escapes, his luck ran out in 2016. He was extradited to the US and sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. Now, he spends his days in ADX Florence, the highest security federal prison in the US, known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Unlike his days as a cartel boss, there is no escape from ADX Florence. His cell is small, made of concrete, with barely any natural light. He spends 23 hours a day in solitary confinement, with only an hour of tightly controlled recreation in a concrete cage. He has no human contact, no outside news, and only brief supervised family calls. The food is bland, the air is thin due to the prison's high-altitude location, and the silence is crushing. For a man who once commanded armies of killers, controlled billions, and lived in luxury, this is the ultimate punishment. There are no tunnels, no bribed guards, no cartel influence inside these walls, just endless days of isolation, locked away in a fortress built to keep even the most dangerous criminals in total confinement. Bernie Madoff was once one of the most powerful men on Wall Street, but his fall from grace was brutal. In 2009, he was sentenced to 150 years in prison for orchestrating the largest Ponzi scheme in history, stealing $65 billion from investors. He was sent to FCI Butner Medium, a federal prison in North Carolina, where he spent the rest of his life behind bars. Unlike violent criminals, Madoff wasn't locked in total isolation, but prison life was still a harsh reality. Gone were the days of wealth and status. His billionaire lifestyle was reduced to a small, shared cell, simple prison meals, and strict routines. His health quickly deteriorated, suffering from kidney disease, and his requests for early release were denied. He spent his final years as a frail, forgotten man, no longer feared or respected. He died in prison in 2021, alone and disgraced. Once celebrated in the financial world, his name is now a symbol of deception and greed. In the end, all the money he stole couldn't buy him freedom or even a dignified end. His empire was built on lies, and he died with nothing left but regret behind prison walls. Carlos Lehder wasn't just another drug lord. He was a visionary of drug trafficking, transforming smuggling operations into a billion-dollar enterprise. As one of the co-founders of the Medellin cartel, he helped turn cocaine into a global business, using a private island in the Bahamas, Norman's Cay, as a launchpad for smuggling tons of cocaine into the United States. At the height of his power, his net worth was estimated at $2.7 billion, and he lived like royalty, protected by mercenaries and bribed officials. But his empire crumbled. In 1987, after being captured in Colombia and extradited to the United States, he was sentenced to life plus 135 years for drug trafficking and money laundering. He ended up in USP Marion, one of the toughest prisons in America at the time. It was a stark contrast to his days of excess. His cell was small, cold, and stripped of all luxury. The days of private planes and armed guards were gone, replaced by prison-issued uniforms, steel bunk beds, and strict routines. His sentence was later reduced after he cooperated with authorities, and in 2020, after more than 30 years behind bars, he was released and sent to Germany. By then, he was a forgotten man, his fortune gone, his power erased. The once feared smuggler, who changed the drug trade forever, spent his last years of freedom in obscurity, far from the empire he once ruled. Frank Lucas built an empire on pure heroin, smuggling it directly from Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. Unlike other dealers, he cut out the middlemen, dealing directly with suppliers, which made him one of the most powerful drug lords in America. At his peak, his fortune was estimated at $52 million in cash, with drug profits pouring in at a rate of nearly $1 million per day. He lived in luxury, with mink coats, flashy cars, and properties all over the country. That all ended in 1975, when federal agents arrested him and shut down his operation. Lucas was sentenced to 70 years in prison, locked away in a harsh federal facility where he was surrounded by violent offenders. The king of Harlem's heroin trade was now just another inmate, far from the extravagant lifestyle he once flaunted. Prison life was brutal. Lucas, once feared on the streets, had to adjust to life behind bars, where his past power meant nothing. He later cooperated with authorities, leading to his sentence being reduced and was released in 1981. But his fortune had vanished, and his influence was gone. He spent his later years in a wheelchair, struggling with health issues, far from the empire he once ruled. Frank Lucas, the man who once controlled Harlem's streets, died in 2019, his wealth, power, and fearsome reputation reduced to nothing. Griselda Blanco wasn't just a drug trafficker. She was one of the most feared and ruthless figures in the history of organized crime. Known as the Black Widow, she built a cocaine empire that ran from Colombia to Miami, controlling smuggling routes and ordering the murders of anyone who stood in her way. At her peak, her net worth was estimated at over $2 billion, making her one of the richest and most powerful women in the drug trade. Unlike many male cartel leaders, she thrived in an industry dominated by violence, proving that she was just as ruthless, if not more, than her rivals. Her reign of terror eventually ended in 1985 when she was arrested in California. She was sentenced to over 20 years in prison for drug trafficking and ran her empire from behind bars for as long as she could. Unlike many high-profile criminals, she wasn't placed in luxury detention or given special treatment. She served her time in a federal women's prison, living under strict supervision in a small, shared cell. The woman who once executed rivals without hesitation now had to follow prison rules like any other inmate. While behind bars, she escaped the death penalty when key witnesses against her were mysteriously killed. By the time she was released in 2004, her power had faded, and her former empire had been taken over by younger, more violent cartels. She was deported to Colombia, where she lived a low-profile life, until 2012 when she was gunned down in Medellin. The woman who once ordered the killings of hundreds was ultimately taken out in the same brutal fashion she had inflicted on so many others. Griselda Blanco, once one of the richest and most feared women in the world, died with nothing but her past reputation to her name. Tommaso Buscetta was once one of the most powerful men in the Sicilian mafia, living a life of wealth, violence, and secrecy. He was deeply embedded in Cosa Nostra, controlling drug routes and ordering assassinations. But when his family was slaughtered in a brutal mafia war, he turned on the organization he had once sworn loyalty to. In 1984, Buscetta became the first major mafia boss to break Omerta, the code of silence. His testimony helped bring down over 300 mobsters in Italy's biggest mafia trial. For that, he was a dead man walking. He was placed in high-security prisons, constantly moved for his own safety, living under strict conditions far from the luxurious world he once knew. He spent years behind bars, isolated, always looking over his shoulder. Even after his release, he lived in hiding until his death in 2000. He was once one of the richest and most feared men in organized crime, but his betrayal cost him everything. In the end, the mafia's most infamous traitor died far from Sicily, a ghost of the empire he once ruled. That's about it. Write in the comments which criminal surprised you the most. For more useful information, watch other videos.